Hello, and welcome to this edition of Philosophy TV. I'm Graham Hubbs of the Philosophy Department at the University of Idaho.
And I'm Michael O'Rourke, also a member of the Philosophy Department at the University of Idaho.
And our topic today is going to be philosophical intervention, in particular the use of epistemology, metaphysics, and the philosophy of science to help scientists in their work, to make science better. And we're going to focus on the Toolbox project, which is an NSF-sponsored project in applied epistemology with which Michael is involved. The Toolbox project is an interdisciplinary project that focuses on facilitating improvements in collaborative and interdisciplinary research. And Michael, if you wouldn't mind, would you give us just a bit more detail on what the project itself is, how it works?
Sure. It's a project that focuses on running a certain kind of workshop, a workshop in which philosophical ideas and concepts are used to frame a dialogue among collaborative cross-disciplinary researchers. The dialogue is philosophical in part because philosophy provides a systematic way of accessing their research worldviews and articulating their assumptions. It also provides a mechanism for generating common ground on which they can stand to talk about these things and come to understand one another better as collaborators and as scientists. The goal is to enhance their self-understanding as scientists as well as their mutual understanding as a collaborative team, and that epistemic effect we hypothesize should have a cascade of beneficial effects downstream, including greater team cohesion, greater productivity, just better communication all the way around.
Well, great. Well, you were trained as a good old-fashioned analytic philosopher, and your disciplinary research is on good old-fashioned analytic topics like theory of reference and that sort of thing. How did someone with your background get involved in philosophical intervention? How did you get involved in this project in the first place?
I think the short answer is I can't say no.
But that answer
slightly...
will answer a whole host of questions that we're not going to raise today. So specifically with this question, with this
and
topic,
you want to be, I think you probably in general want to be suspicious of an epistemologist who can't say no.
Yeah.
But anyway, the longer answer involves in part sort of recognizing that you and I are both at a pretty small university. It's a university that is small enough so that many of the faculty know one another and interact with one another across disciplinary lines. It's also a university that has made interdisciplinary collaboration a priority. So the research effort at the University of Idaho has increasingly grown to be more and more interdisciplinary, and the administration at the university has fostered these projects and encouraged them. One of the projects that we've had on campus for quite a few years now is an integrative graduate education and research traineeship project, one of the about 150 or so that the NSF sponsors around the country.
That project has an acronym, right?
It's the IGERT. It's an IGERT. Yeah, it's the program in NSF is IGERT, and the IGERT program sponsors IGERT projects at a variety of universities around the country. University of Idaho has had one. It launched, I believe, in 2001, concluded in 2008, and then was renewed. So we've just started it again in this past year, and will run for another 6 or 7 years. The project that we've been nurturing is a project that embeds a pedagogical idea that's pretty novel, and in fact is not represented very broadly across the IGERT spectrum around the country. The key idea, the key sort of pedagogical innovation in the IGERT that the University of Idaho has run is team-based collaborative PhD work. So a lot of the IGERTs around the country are what you might call value-added IGERTs. They provide PhD students with the opportunity to acquire exposure to and familiarity with work in other disciplines, but it's not an exposure that necessarily impacts the dissertation work that they do, their own disciplinary training. At U of I, the IGERT idea was to bring individuals, PhD students, in and form them into teams. And so you have a team of about 4 people, typically 4 to 5 people. That team will be given the charge of identifying an umbrella research topic. So a research topic that is relatively broad and typically place-based. So it's focuses on an area, a specific location, either in the Northwest, or we have a partner institution in Costa Rica. So it's either Costa Rica or in the Northwest. And each member of that team then conducts research on a specific aspect of that umbrella problem. And each of the members of the team represents a different discipline. So you might have a team that comprises a hydrologist, a soil scientist, an entomologist, an economist. So.
Okay.
And they're working on the impact of banana plantations in in Costa Rica. So.
Okay.
And what they would do, again, is identify this overarching problem, and then they identify specific aspects of that problem that they could address from their particular discipline. They need, in the course of doing their work, to collaborate on the writing of an article that would become a chapter in each of their dissertations. So they'd have a co-authored chapter in each of their dissertations, and that chapter had to be published. So,
okay, so this isn't a bunch of folks go down to a spot and then each does his or her own work, and then they share information.
Right.
It's not like that. They're actually writing these papers together based on the work that they're doing.
Right. They have to work together. They have to, and their success as PhD students depends on it. Right. I mean, they aren't going to get their dissertation unless they pull this off. And so the challenge for all of them was not only to figure out what the research problem was, but also how to collaborate with one another. The PIs on the project, the principal investigators on the project, are all very accomplished interdisciplinary scientists. They're all very experienced at collaborating with partners across the disciplinary spectrum. Not all that experienced in helping graduate students figure out how to do this. Right? It's like, you can do it, but you might not be able to articulate exactly what it is you're doing. And the graduate students flailed. They in some cases really struggled to figure out how to do this at a high enough level to be productive of dissertation level research. At one point, a couple of the graduate students approached a PI and suggested that perhaps the IGERT project could devote its seminar to philosophical issues in interdisciplinary research. So, I mean, things had gotten so bad that a couple of people were thinking, well, philosophy is the answer, right? And these are a couple of students who had philosophical experience as undergraduates, and they appreciated the fact that philosophy can enable individuals to abstract away from specific disciplinary difference toward common ground that they might all share together, and that kind of move might enable them to identify, or at least initially, to understand one another a bit more completely, and that understanding could downstream have the effect of enabling them to work together more efficiently. That was the idea, and that's, in fact, that's the idea that's remained operative in the Toolbox project as it's come into existence. I was approached at that time and given the opportunity to team teach this PhD seminar. We invited not only the students from the IGERT, which focused, by the way, on biodiversity conservation and sustainable agriculture in fragmented landscapes.
Okay, so that was the first project, was the one whose title you just provided right there?
Right, that's right.
Okay.
And we also invited students from around the university to participate. So we had a couple of biology PhD students. We had several philosophy graduate students. And we worked together to identify a mechanism, some kind of solution for the problem that these IGERT students had. I mean, they were adamant. They absolutely demanded that we focus not on lofty philosophical ideas, but on the use of philosophy to develop something that would make their lives better. That was They were insistent that in the seminar we focus on developing some kind of approach or some kind of solution to the problem that they had. And so they kept our feet to the fire throughout the course of that seminar. And what we came up with was what we call the toolbox, which is it's right here. It's just a couple of sheets of paper that have a number of statements on them, philosophical statements, that are designed to get at joints in one's research worldview. And the point of putting these statements on paper is that you can then put the paper in front of collaborators, have them read through it, react to it, and then talk about it. And in the course of dialogue, effectively give effectively give an articulation of how they see their scientific landscape. Right? So the point of the toolbox really is to just provide philosophical structure up front, so that the collaborators who are engaged in the dialogue don't have to do the philosophy themselves. It's already kind of prepackaged into this instrument, and they, in talking through it and reacting to the statements, will themselves engage in philosophical dialogue. They'll do philosophy, perhaps without even realizing that's what they're doing. They might not have a much sort of philosophical self-consciousness. They might not have taken a philosophy class or done much philosophical reading, but we've done the philosophical work for them up front. They go in, they talk, and over the course of the conversation, if things go as we would like them to go, they come to see the research world through the eyes of their collaborators.
Oh, great. Can you give us maybe a sample statement, or just tell us a little bit more about the particular statements in the toolbox and how they're organized? I mean, I'm keen to hear one or two that
Sure.
tends to generate conversation or disagreement, but also I'm also curious as whether the statements are just
Yeah,
some
sure.
some expression of realism, true or false,
Right.
or do
Well,
they they
let
grade
me
it, or how does it work?
Great. Yeah. So I should say that particular seminar produced the toolbox. We published it as a group in an article in Bioscience in the Journal of the American Biological Society in 2007. And as you indicated, we've been funded by the National Science Foundation to continue developing the toolbox idea and deploying it. We've conducted now about 60 workshops around the country at a variety of universities, from Cornell to Michigan State, UC Davis, Stanford, and University of Idaho, and various other places. So we've been at this. The seminar we ran in 2005 in the spring, and we've been at it since then, trying to figure out how this works when it does work, how it fails when it fails, how extensible it is, what type of impact it has on different types of collaborations and so forth. So we've been hard at work trying to figure out what to make of this piece of philosophical technology that we've developed. The instrument itself, the toolbox, I mean I apologize for the name. This name's a reflection of the fact that we were pretty imagination challenged when we had, I guess we're thinking about other things, and when it came time to name the thing, we ran out of ideas. But in any case, it's a couple of sheets of paper and printed on both sides. The statements that we've come up with are divided into two broad categories. There's the epistemology category and the metaphysics category. The epistemology category is roughly an attempt to capture what we must be like that we may investigate the world. The metaphysics category is one designed to get at what the world must be like that it can be investigated by us, so to borrow from Kornblith. But those are the two broad categories. Each of those categories has three subcategories, or what we're now calling modules. The epistemology side contains three that we call motivation, methodology, and confirmation. And this tracks what we take to be the trajectory of research, from what you bring to the table as a researcher, your motivation, to how you conduct your research business, methodology, to how you identify when you're in a position to say something that might be interesting to others, confirmation. So that's the epistemology side. It has a relatively elegant a priori structure. On the metaphysics side, things are a little bit more hodgepodge.
Uh-huh.
The metaphysics, so the epistemology side kind of came together from the top down. The metaphysics side came together from the bottom up. We did a lot of reading in the seminar of papers reporting on failed efforts. There's actually something of a burgeoning, what you might call failure literature
Uh-huh.
in some of these scientific journals. Literature devoted to publishing, to articles that articulate reasons why collaborative efforts did not come to fruition.
Uh-huh.
So people will talk about a variety of different things that didn't work, about obstacles or barriers to cross-disciplinary collaboration. And the metaphysics category kind of grew out of that. And so we have the three subcategories in the metaphysics part of the toolbox are reality, values, and reductionism. So the reality section focuses on things like the nature of models and how models are used in the course of scientific inquiry, the nature of scale and how scale can
Mm-hmm.
divide and differentiate different ways of engaging with the world. Whether or not the world is seen as a human construction, at least in the parts that are of interest to the investigators. The values section is really probably a little bit too broad in its current incarnation, but it attempts to get a number of different ways in which we value aspects of scientific practice. So this includes ethical or moral values, but it also includes things like differentiating between good evidence and bad evidence, questions of bias, also questions of advocacy, whether or not scientists who might be the most knowledgeable about various aspects of the world should also, by virtue of their privileged epistemological position, become advocates for certain ways of thinking about those areas.
Mm-hmm.
And then the reductionism section focuses on the relationship between sort of reductionist approaches to investigation of the world and more holistic approaches that might give privilege a place to emergent phenomena that can't be reduced. So these are the three subcategories in the metaphysics section. Now you asked for specific statements. Here are just a couple of specific statements. From the methodology section, scientific research must be hypothesis-driven. From the confirmation section, validation of evidence requires replication.
And would somebody looking at these questions then just say yes or no, or do they? How would they respond to such a statement?
Right. In the version we published, each of these statements were actually questions, and the idea was just to respond to the questions. But in the current instrument, what we have is statements, and then each statement's associated with a Likert scale. And so you read through it at the beginning of the workshop, and you score the Likert scale from strongly disagree to strongly agree.
Right.
And they kind of move through the instrument that way, and then you go back and talk about these statements. A couple of other examples just to kind of represent the range. From the reality section, scientific claims need not represent objective reality to be useful. From the values section, incorporating one's personal perspective and framing a research question is never valid. Okay, so those are four examples of the statements that we have included in the instrument.
Great. It's very interesting. It strikes me as the sort of thing that at least some philosophers of science would be curious about some of the results that you've generated so far, especially those working or interested anyway in the differences between particular scientific fields. Are there any particular questions that so far that you could report as having being answered in a certain way by a certain demographic and answered in a different way by a different demographic? Are there questions that routinely or predictably generate differences that then can be hashed out and discussed?
Good. Yeah. So this is, as your question implies, a research project, and our goal certainly one of our goals is to determine what kind of impact this dialogue has on the way that collaborators think about themselves as scientists, and but also the way that collaborators think about their research projects.
Mm-hmm.
It's in addition to being a research project, it's intended also to be a kind of outreach project. So it's, as you indicated up front, it's an example of what we think of as philosophical intervention. We weren't
Sure.
thinking of it in those terms originally, but one of the bioscience reviewers referred to this as an epistemological intervention. So,
Uh-huh.
and it's again, it kind of suggests that maybe what we're about is riding in and saving the day with a group that's troubled or really up against it, as far as their science is concerned. That's not exactly how we were thinking about it.
Right. The intervention, and to the extent that this description is apt, it's a group intervention of sort, right? You've
Right.
got a group that is has a unity, it's got a common goal, it's stuck together, it can't get apart from itself, and yet it's dysfunctioning, right? And so
Right. That would be, yeah.
Somehow philosophy comes in and saves the day, huh?
Well,
or it tries to, right?
we'd like to think that at least we don't make things worse. Right?
Right.
No, I mean the early evidence, and this gets to the question that you asked after is or that you asked is a question about results, and that's
Right,
and that's given the fact that we're not just interested in going in as philosophers and wiggling different aspects of team function and see what happens. We're also interested in trying to have a salutary impact on the life of teams. We're actually interested in doing what our graduate students wanted us to do in that seminar, and that's make their lives better. That's one of the primary objectives we have for this project. Given that, it's imperative that we do a proper job of collecting evidence and assessing whether or not the hypothesis we have, namely that the toolbox intervention has a beneficial impact
Mm-hmm.
on most proximally the mutual understanding that is exhibited by the collaborating scientists, but more distally it has a beneficial impact on things like team cohesion and their communication dynamic especially about the science. But even more distally than that, we believe that this should have a positive impact on output measures, things like publications and future grants
Mm-hmm.
awarded, and maybe even enabling them to solve the problems that they set out to solve in the first place.
Right.
So it's imperative that we collect data, analyze data, and evaluate it to determine what kind of impact we're having. Agreed. So the team that I'm a part of, the team that I direct, is actually quite an interdisciplinary team itself, with sociologists, and we have a couple of entomologists on the team. Another philosopher, Steve Crowley, who's an epistemologist, philosopher of science at Boise State, is a member of the team. So we've put together quite an interdisciplinary group ourselves, and the project up to this point really has been primarily a social, scientifically informed philosophy project. That's kind of how we thought of it. We're transitioning at the moment from that to a philosophically informed social science project. And that transition is being driven really by a desire to have really good, much shorter, less long-winded answers to your question.
I was wondering if we were going to get back to it, but
I haven't forgotten.
In the style of a philosopher, right? There was plenty of build-up to get into the answer.
That's right. I have to frame my answer.
Yes.
And so, okay. In some ways, that long-winded preamble is an attempt to kind of get out of having anything really interesting to say in response to your question. We've collected, as I said, we've run about 60 of these things. We've collected an enormous amount of data. We're pretty much up to our neck in it, and we are gradually digging our way out. The analytic strategies that we've employed to date really have focused less on the statement level detail and more on the sort of kind of instrument or workshop level details. So we collect not only data from the workshops, we audio tape them, transcribe the audio tapes, conduct content and conversation analysis of the transcript data. We also collect survey data prior to the workshops and then after the workshops, and there's the Likert data that we collect from the toolbox instrument itself before the workshop and then again after it. And so this is a variety of different types of data collected, much of it qualitative, that we use that we've used so far to assess as best we can the 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 overall impact of the workshop on these teams. And so we're kind of operating at this higher level of analysis where what we're interested in doing initially is determining whether or not these teams believe the workshop they participated in has had a positive impact on their projects. And so far so good, right?
Great.
The next step is to go deeper and start picking at the specific statements and evaluating in a more quantitative way, a more statistical way, different patterns that emerge around the statements that are embedded in this toolbox itself. So, for instance, we collect also demographic data about participants and trying to determine whether, for instance, there are statistically significant differences between the kinds of responses that are represented by the Likert data, but also the kinds of things said by folks who come from a particular disciplinary background, as opposed to somebody who comes from another, maybe somebody who comes from a reductionist scientific background, maybe a biophysical scientist who, a soil scientist, or someone who spends a fair amount of time analyzing samples in a lab, versus a social scientist, maybe somebody trained in a kind of post-positivist paradigm as a sociologist who evaluates who collects qualitative data and does qualitative studies. I mean, you would expect, and we do expect, and we have anecdotal sort of evidence to support this, that there are going to be different patterns of response emerging from these different quarters to the instrument and to things said in dialogue. And that's the deeper level of analysis that we're now beginning to conduct. Among other things, the early returns suggest that, for instance, people are going to have very different attitudes about the role that hypotheses play in scientific inquiry. It's not uncommon for us to find in these dialogues folks saying, say engineers, people coming from engineering, or people coming from certain kinds of scientific backgrounds, some geological backgrounds, for example, where they do a fair amount of observational work, that they just don't, that their science isn't framed or driven by hypotheses. And when this comes up and they speak frankly in that way, it generates typically quite a lot of excitement among their colleagues. I mean, we've had people say things like, well, I mean, if you're not formulating and then testing hypotheses, you're not doing science.
That's right. Yeah.
So, it's a few sparks fly in some of these dialogues about hypotheses. Another example of a concept that gets some play in this way, it generates a fair amount of interesting dialogue about scientific practice, is the concept of replication and the role that replication plays in establishing or legitimating claims, scientific claims. So, some things are easy to replicate. Other things, claims about the past, scientific claims that about events, they're just very difficult to replicate.
Right.
And so the role that replication plays in providing the kind of epistemic foundation upon which to set results is going to be different across the disciplinary spectrum, and that shows up in these dialogues.
Great. Well, I also I wanted to ask you a bit about this, not the project, not as a bit of intervention, but as a bit of applied philosophy. At the introduction, I characterized this work under both heads, and I'm glad that we spent so much time talking about philosophical intervention, because that notion, I suspect, is unfamiliar to many that may be watching this right now. The notion of applied philosophy is perhaps more familiar and already comes equipped with its own prejudices. So I wonder if you could tell me a little bit about what your experience has been in doing applied philosophy. I mean, again, you were your background and your training and your disciplinary research didn't involve applied philosophy. What's it been like moving from being a good old-fashioned analytic philosopher to one who's trying to use his skills in some sort of applied manner?
Great. Yeah. No. Thanks. As you mentioned, I was trained as an analytic philosopher, a philosopher of language, and I was trained at a place where not very many people thought about, let alone did, applied philosophy. So it was not really on my radar screen coming out of graduate school.
Mm-hmm.
The kind of one thing leads to another as it happens when you launch a career, and the fact that I'm located at the University of Idaho has put me in a position to forge working relationships with people outside of our department, and that's given me opportunity to think a little bit more broadly about philosophical aspects of intellectual inquiry, and those conversations have led to a variety of research opportunities for me. Another project that I've been engaged in for about 6 or 7 years now is autonomous underwater vehicles project that's conducted by a group of engineers in the College of Engineering here, and my work is concerns on that. In that project, agent communication languages and communication protocols for autonomous underwater vehicles, mini submarines. And there, I mean, I bring to bear my philosophical training in perhaps a more obviously direct way on problems that arise in the design and testing of mini submarines that communicate underwater. On this project, the Toolbox project, my work is more, I think, epistemological, although of late the philosophy of language training that I've done has become more relevant to the work that we're doing now that we're kind of in analytic mode or in analysis mode with respect to the data set that we've constituted. But the shift in the direction of applied philosophy has taken me a little bit by surprise. I wasn't expecting it, and honestly, when I was invited to team teach that seminar by Sanford Eigenbrod, who's an entomologist who was the PI in charge of that seminar, he said, come on, I know you're teaching 3 classes, and this will be an overload, so this will be your 4th class that semester. I know you're teaching those classes. Well, it's just 1 credit, just once a week, 1 hour a week. We're just going to read this book, this book. That's all we're going to do. You can read a book. It's like, okay, fine, I'll do it. And then we had a few more conversations, and we hit it off, and the next thing you know, we're writing an article together with a bunch of graduate students that we're all really excited about. But and that's kind of my own personal story about how I got involved in this project, and it's really kind of exploded in ways that I would never have anticipated. But one of the things that I think it reveals maybe a little bit more, that has a little bit more generality, is what I have come to think of as the applied philosopher's dilemma. Right? If you engage in applied philosophical work, whether you're an epistemologist like me who's working on aspects of knowledge construction across the disciplines, or if you're an applied ethicist or an environmental ethicist who is engaged in work outside of the philosophical community with people perhaps in hospitals or other biomedical contexts, or perhaps ecologists and others on issues of sustainability or climate change. There's an example of a very good episode of Philosophy TV that focuses on this. If you're engaged in that kind of work, then you really are confronted by a dilemma. The dilemma basically has to do with how you're received from without the philosophical community by people who are not philosophers. Right? You are often marginalized or dismissed, and by people within the philosophical community, philosophers, you're marginalized or dismissed. You kind of get it coming and going. And there are a couple of different ways.
I take it the dismissal must be on different grounds in each instance, right?
They're different, yes, but I think there's some interesting similarities, right? When you walk outside the philosophical community and you start to interact with folks who are, they might be within the academy, but they aren't philosophers, scientists, social scientists, or they might be without the academy. They might be outside of it. They might be managers on public lands, or policymakers, or stakeholders. People like farmers and ranchers, for instance. To many of these folks, philosophy is just, it's just another F word, right? It's they don't know a lot about it, and they're not especially interested in learning very much about it. In many cases, I think the farther you move away from the academy, the more hostile the reception can be. But still, philosophers are especially when they advertise themselves as philosophers, they're not often very well received for several reasons. One, the kind of work we do is regarded often as being too abstract and ivory tower. I don't think that's in many cases a fair assessment, but that's the stereotype. There's concern about our technical ability, right? That if we're working with scientists, we don't know, we're not trained in their disciplines, and we can't do their math. And again, unfair stereotype. A lot of philosophers are capable of engaging in deep and detailed conversations with scientists, but as a philosopher, that's the reputation you kind of assigned by, in many cases. And then finally, you're just regarded as having the wrong tools for the job, bringing to bear the wrong methodology. You have to argue and convince them that philosophical methods actually do have value in those contexts. But at least initially, the reaction is one of dismissal based on the fact that you're just the wrong person for the job. And from the philosophical side, I think that it's not all that different. I mean, you can characterize it in some of the same terms. Again, it's not that what we do when you do applied philosophy it's not that it's regarded as too abstract by more sort of mainstream philosophers. Instead, it's on the same spectrum. It's just the other end, right? You're just regarded as being much too concrete.
Right.
You're not really
right.
engaged in
the deep questions.
In the deep questions, exactly. Yeah. You're engaged. You're again, I think, quite unfairly regarded in many cases as bringing to bear simplified versions of philosophical ideas on problems outside of philosophy. I don't think that, again, is true in many cases, but you're regarded as being engaging in work that's too concrete, it's too simple, it's too empirical, it's not philosophical, right? The technical worry, right, that I articulated before is another worry that I think comes in for our applied philosophers here, in that your stuff isn't technical enough. And in this case, what the point is that it's not philosophically technical enough.
Right.
And then finally, again, wrong methods for the job. You're just not using, by engaging in application, you're in a, I don't know, maybe this isn't right, maybe this isn't fair, but it seems to me that in many cases, traditional philosophers regard the work you do as sullying philosophical methodology with empirical issues or empirical concerns that may it's not. I mean, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's just not philosophy. Right. So you kind of get it, like I said, coming and going, and that's the dilemma that you confront as an applied philosopher. And personally, and the philosophers on the Toolbox project, we don't think of it that way. We don't think of it that way at all. In fact, we believe that philosophy, not only in this applied form, not only has the opportunity to provide real value and direct value for the projects that we collaborate with. So our scientific partners on these cross-disciplinary research teams, we believe, have an opportunity to profit directly from the work we do. But also, what we'd like to do, and what we've tried to do over the course of the project, is create a kind of feedback loop. If you're a philosopher interested in more traditional philosophical problems like we are, going out into the world, putting yourself in sort of epistemologically consequential situations like we have, puts you in a position to reevaluate and reconceive some of the old philosophical problems. So it enables you, we believe, to make gains on traditional philosophical issues. Right? So you can create a kind of feedback loop from the cross-disciplinary research context within which the Toolbox instrument is applied to traditional philosophy. So traditional philosophy informs the Toolbox project and the work we do with the cross-disciplinary research collaborators, and that work informs traditional philosophy. At least that's how we. And so it's an attempt on our part to resolve the dilemma.
Right. Well, I'd like to hear you say a bit more of that again. So, knowing your background is in things like theory of reference, and it having been a while since I've read and studied this kind of thing, but having some familiarity from my past, I find it, at least initially, not just difficult, but very difficult to imagine how oh, I don't know. I'm sitting down with my Evans and I'm trying to page through it and make sense of what he's saying in the varieties of reference. How
Great book.
the kinds of issues and positions, arguments with Kripke say that are being charted in that text. Um, uh, uh, how applied work, empirical work, the kinds of data that one would gather, or insights one would gather, or understanding one would gather, knowledge one would gather in the course of doing something like the sort of thing that you do in the Toolbox project really could come to bear on answering questions about the relationship between sense and reference fixing meaning, how names work, definite, all the kinds of traditional questions that come up in that context, right? So I'll play the role of the skeptic. How does it work? Why wouldn't, if you're just answering those kinds of questions, be better suited, either sitting in your chair thinking real hard or talking with other really bright philosophers who are curious about those issues?
Yeah, I don't want to dismiss that. I mean, that's
Well, you didn't say you were,
no,
but
right.
I'm playing the skeptic here. Like,
Yeah, I understand.
What good at all could come of talking with some ranchers or some entomologists if you're trying to figure out stuff about theory of reference?
Yeah, it's important to recognize that when it comes to the Toolbox workshops, we run with, and today we run most of our workshops with researchers, like research teams, so academics who are from the sciences and social sciences. We are, at the moment, moving out in beyond the walls of the academy, right? We're working with translational health science teams that involve clinicians and other medical practitioners and professionals.
That's great.
On the one side, and on the other side, we're working with another sort of translational effort that focuses on climate change and the impact that climate change has on Northwest agriculture. There's a couple of funded initiatives in the Northwest, one that's funded by the Department of Interior, the Northwest Climate Science Center, and then a USDA NEFA funded project that focuses on regional effects of climate change. Both of those projects put us in touch with managers, policymakers, and stakeholders. And so we'll be running workshops that are our attempt to foster dialogue among collaborators, not all of whom are researchers, with a view, again, to enabling them to see the problem space through the eyes of their collaborators. So this represents a new set of challenges for us, but
well, hang on. I'm not going to let you off the hook of the question because that didn't come anywhere near answering the question. But that was a politician might have been using that as a dodge of some sort. But we're not politicians around here. We're philosophers.
You're not just a skeptic.
No. Right. So I did want to the amount of the variety of projects and the number of projects that you've had, I find quite impressive. How does it work? Setting aside the reference question that I'm going to get back to in a second, or
sure.
If that's an instant question. How have people sought out the Toolbox, or how have you gone and solicited folks to get involved, or to just word of mouth pass around and we got a problem where there are these folks up in Idaho who can help solve a problem? How does that work?
Well, initially we used the IGERT network to identify partners. So when we were funded initially, we began working with integrative graduate education and research traineeship projects at other universities. And word got around. Most of the workshops that we've conducted up to this point, in fact, have been word-of-mouth workshops. We've not done any advertising outside of a conference that we ran last fall. We've not really done much advertising of the work that we do. We've initiated conversations, but we've also had others initiate conversations with us, and that has led to much more work than we are capable of doing at the moment. Yeah, I mean, these projects that I mentioned are exciting and represent a real opportunity for philosophers to get, to have a direct impact on projects that are consequential and I think promise to make a real difference in the lives of people outside of the academy, and not just our students, right? I mean, we're familiar with philosophical intervention in the lives of students.
Sure.
That's what we get paid to do. But
right.
But we're now talking about folks who, again, aren't going to have the time of day, aren't going to give the time of day to a philosopher in general, but nevertheless might be able to profit from thinking philosophically about the problem that they're they're focusing on, and thinking philosophically about their collaborators. And so it's an exciting opportunity for us. We're kind of, it's a daunting opportunity in many ways. But the reason I mentioned that was in part just to call attention to the fact that when we do the workshops, we tend to regard most of our work as already being done, right?
Mm-hmm.
As I mentioned earlier, the instrument in a sense embeds. It's a piece of philosophical technology as we see it. It embeds a lot of philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
And so our philosophical contribution to these workshops is locked down in the form of that instrument.
Right.
It's embedded there. We go in, we give them the instrument, and our facilitation style in these workshops is really hands-off. It's not about us, it's about them. So it's really important for them to be talking about their own worldviews. And,
so, for example,
so
when they
we
get
we don't do philosophy with them.
Yeah, they make some metaphysical claim, and you don't teach them the sense-reference distinction, right?
No.
Which brings us back to the question of,
yeah,
of tell me how your philosophical research, how that feedback loop works for traditional questions in, say, philosophy of language.
So, okay, so given that we don't talk philosophy with our collaborators,
right,
one might wonder where the foundation is for that second part of the feedback loop I mentioned, right? And so far, the data we've used to support philosophical reconception of traditional problems is the dialogue data, the transcript data that we've collected in these workshops. I mean, keep in mind, what the workshops are philosophical dialogues among people who are like really, really smart, capable people. They aren't trained as philosophers, but they are trained as again, up to this point, the work that we've done is with researchers, so they're trained in some discipline or another, in the knowledge game. I mean, that's the business they're in, and so, they have very interesting perspectives on many of the philosophical issues that come up. Now, so I mentioned hypothesis before. We're working on a manuscript right now that focuses on different ways in which scientists use the term hypothesis, and that promises what we take to be a pretty rich opportunity for us to go in and kind of do if not a taxonomy, maybe a piece of conceptual cartography around the concept of hypothesis. There are a couple of other different things that we've concentrated some attention on that don't emerge directly from the data in the way that the manuscript on the hypotheses has, but instead emerge from a kind of adopting a meta level perspective on the data we collected. So thinking philosophically about the problems that emerge in the course of the dialogues, we've put ourselves in a position, we think, to come up with some interesting things to say about a couple of problems, which I'll introduce as examples here.
Okay.
One is on the side of philosophy of language, but I'll set that aside for just a minute. The one that we probably spent most of our time thinking about has to do with the epistemology of disagreement, which is another a topic that has been the focus of another philosophy TV episode.
Right.
One involving Professors Christensen and Sorensen.
And we can probably put links to that in the one that you mentioned as well underneath ours. That would be good. Okay.
Yeah. No, and the in that episode, Professor Christensen notes that a lot of the problems or examples or what have you that have been the focus of epistemologists interested in disagreement and reasonable disagreement have been what he called toy examples, and that seems correct to us. We think that cross-disciplinary research provides a really interesting example of a space within which disagreements arise that might force, we believe, folks who are working on this topic to think again about the prospects for reasonable disagreement. And roughly, here's how it might go. You've got a group of collaborators. Let's say they've been working together for quite some time. They're collaborating on a project. They have available to them all of the data that's been collected on the project. So all of the evidence that has been generated by the group is available to all of them. Let's say that, just for the purposes of the argument, that they all have access to it and all appreciate it. They regard themselves as epistemic peers, right? I mean, they're working with one another on a research project, and so there's at least ample extrinsic evidence of epistemic peerhood here, and yet they may very well come to a different epistemic positions with respect to the data they've collected. They may, in effect, with respect to a given proposition P, which is some hypothesis say, they may, one of them may endorse it and another one may reject it, and based on the same set of evidence. And the differential positions adopted by these individuals might be a reflection of their specific disciplinary orientations. Right? They have the same evidence, but the evidence is in a sense integrated into their epistemological perspective differently, and as a consequence, the conclusions they arrive at are different as well. Now, one could, and there are a variety of different ways you could respond to this, I think, in order to reestablish the problem. But it seems to me that the idea that the evidence could be regarded differently in the way that you find cross-disciplinary scientists regarding evidence differently is an example of a nuance that hasn't been reflected in the illustrative examples that show up in that literature to date. So that's an example of one place where we think there might be some interesting new ideas for a traditional philosophical problem. Another place has to do with the philosophy of language. And here, what we're kind of working on is an attempt to model communication. And referential communication is an aspect of this, but at the moment we're thinking more generally in terms of just communication, focusing on the actual utterances that people make and the way in which people actually communicate. So this is the sort of thing that philosophers don't do very often. They don't tend to focus on snippets of text or of dialogue that actually look and feel like the kinds of dialogue we engage in. Linguists, psycholinguists, tend to spend quite a bit of time working with data like this, but philosophers tend not to.
Certainly, there is a long-standing. I mean, that you wouldn't want to. There are philosophers who attend to that kind of thing, but
sure,
it's fair to say that there's a tradition in the philosophy of language that does not approach the subject matter of language in the manner that you've just described.
Fair enough. Okay, so let's do it that way. Yes, there is a.
Because it says someday you're coming down kind of hard on these philosophers sometimes.
No, I mean I'm just saying that there are different ways of looking at.
I'm expecting you're going to pull off the mask here, and I don't know what's going to be underneath there, but it's not going to be a philosopher. So.
See, there you go. There you go. This is exactly what I get. I tell you, from within, from without, it doesn't matter.
That's right.
Yeah. Philosophers tend to conceptualize linguistic problems and problems of communication differently than linguists and psycholinguists, and even with obviously different philosophers look at this in different ways, and I don't mean to be making a general claim about all philosophers here, but there certainly are traditions, and the tradition I was trained in that tends to focus on a relatively small number of examples that are examples of well-formed sentences. Often in dialogue we don't engage in the production and interpretation of well-formed sentences.
Right.
The data itself is not as much of an interest to us as the way in which we engage in a kind of back and forth effort at meaning construction. This is a concept that linguists have talked about for some time. Herb Clark spent a fair amount of time talking about this, called joint construal. Where the focus is on the collaborative creation of meaning in the context of dialogue, and one of the things that we've noticed in these Toolbox Workshop dialogues is that there is a significant presence of joint construal. There's a lot of examples of individuals who say one thing and then pressed by a collaborator, kind of back up a little bit and say it slightly differently, and then come at it from a different angle, and they go back and forth, and they wind up creating what amounts to a joint product, a joint sort of semantic product that they kind of all line up with. Right now, it may be something that represents a very different kind of claim or statement than the one that initiated that little bit of dialogue. But you can see the effort at kind of collaborative meaning construction in the context of the back and forth between these collaborators. And you could argue, I think, that what's happened there is that the meanings of the statements made were in some sense all provisional, and that it's really kind of everything's up in the air and nothing's fixed until they've kind of come to some sort of collaborative conclusion about what it is they mean by this. And then you can see
the meanings are provisional. So
yeah,
could I understand that claim to mean that the first person speaks and he or she does not strongly take on sets of commitments, takes on sort of like tentatively takes on a range of commitments, not a single commitment through, or tentatively takes on a range of commitments, and then that the process kind of lops off certain commitments, pulls others up, and that by the end of that, a particular, a more, the set of commitments that are taken on is now more specific and, let's say, maybe more strongly endorsed than initially. Is that a fair
I think
understanding?
The way the details work here are, I mean, I'm not providing an argument as much as I am just trying to sketch a picture of how you might think of these snippets of dialogue.
Right.
Right. But yeah, I mean, what the sense of, I mean, you could see some of the referring expressions in these dialogues. So when they're talking about hypotheses, for example, just to come back to that, when they're talking about models, another topic that generates quite a few sparks in the course of these dialogues. What the individuals who use these terms mean by these terms when they use them initially might be, they might not really have a very clear sense of what the heck they mean by these terms, right? And it's only kind of in dialogue that they come to have an appreciation for how they want their claim to be evaluated. Right. So the initial claim they might have made that could have generated this sort of pushback from their collaborators. Right, how they want that claim to be taken is, in some sense, provisional. And over the course of the dialogue, they might back up a little bit. They might, I mean, not necessarily retract, but reshape the claim that they take themselves to have made. And then, once, if things come to some sort of resolution, you might argue that you get a kind of retroactive or backfilling of meaning to the point where the initial claim was made. Now, again, this is just a picture. There's no argument in anything I've said for this. And, it might be completely crazy. But it is an interesting way of thinking about how communication works, in particular referential communication.
Sure. Well,
that's informed by these real-world dialogues, and also lines up in interesting ways with some research in sociolinguistics and psycholinguistics and certain parts of philosophy as well.
Yeah. Well, if that description is accurate, it sounds to me a bit like, to take us back to a term that we've come up against several times through here, good old-fashioned analysis, right? But
exactly.
If that is the case, I think it's, I don't know, striking and perhaps even impressive that you can devise a tool that gets non-philosophers to engage in the practice of analysis, and not just willy-nilly for no good, but towards the end of working together collaboratively on a project. But I also like the idea that somehow that this really is a tool that you can just throw out there and hands off, step back and watch them engage it, instead of having to didactically direct the thing from from the podium.
The point you just made is a really good one, and it's one that I hadn't really thought about before. But we have this instrument that puts into play all these philosophical concepts. And it tended to put them into play systematically, so that they don't just feel bombarded by this, but rather think of this as a kind of conceptual map of their research worldviews, right? So they should be able to read through this and find it to be somewhat familiar to them. But one of the things that they do, and the point you just made is right on target. One of the things they do in working through these statements and in trying to figure out what the heck the other people are saying about these statements is they engage in conceptual analysis.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And you don't have to be a card-carrying philosopher to do philosophy, right? You don't. I mean, you can do. I think scientists and social scientists, others in the knowledge game, do philosophy all the time,
mm-hmm.
right? When they engage in conceptual analysis, when they're working on their scientific or their empirical problems in a way that requires them to kind of take a step back and reframe the problem space so as to perhaps design a new experiment or whatever. There's philosophical work that gets done in that.
Sure.
And so they have philosophical experience and in many of them prodigious philosophical ability. And our workshops put them into a position to talk concepts and figure out how to make commensurable the incommensurable when it comes to conceptual disagreements. And what happens a lot of times is some extremely interesting and informative conceptual analysis.
That's great. Well, Michael, thank you for talking to me and to the rest of the Philosophy TV world today about the Toolbox Project.
Absolutely.
I'm guessing that we'll also, along with the links to the other Philosophy TV episodes that we've mentioned in the course of this discussion, put a link up to the Toolbox Project so people can check it out and see what it's all about, and maybe also to the paper that you described, the first paper that came out.
So one of the things, just if I could end with something, what I'd like to end with is just by this note that philosophy is an incredibly powerful discipline, right? And its power isn't the kind of thing that need only be appreciated indirectly, need only be appreciated decades or centuries after it's been exhibited, but it can be appreciated directly and immediately by people who aren't philosophers, right? And I think that, I'm not really yet in a position with the Toolbox Project to say much, with confidence about the kind of impact that we have. As I mentioned, we're still kind of on the early edge of analyzing the data we've collected, but certainly the early returns and the anecdotal evidence that we've collected suggests that this is a way of taking philosophy and directly applying it to the lives of scientists and thereby improving their lives, making their situations better. And this is just one example of how philosophy can be deployed for the purposes of making life better. I think we either in some cases maybe fail to appreciate, but certainly underappreciate the power of what we do.
Well, great. Well, thanks. And
Thank you, Graham.
All right. Take care, Michael.
All right. Bye-bye.